The third double shift that week was going to kill her. Sarah pressed her palm against the service corridor wall and waited for the black spots to clear from her vision. She'd skipped lunch again, no time between the catering prep and the evening service, and breakfast had been half a granola bar eaten standing over the sink in her cramped studio apartment. Her body was running on caffeine and spite, and both were wearing dangerously thin. "Sarah," the head caterer's voice cut through the corridor. "The Vitale table needs their wine service. Now." She straightened, smoothing down her white server's jacket and grabbed the bottle of Barolo from the side station. $200 a bottle. More than she made in a shift. She'd learned not to think about things like that. The obscene wealth that surrounded her at these events. The jewelry that cost more than her yearly rent. The casual way these people dropped thousands on a single meal while she calculated whether she could afford both electricity and groceries this month. The private dining room at Castellucci's was reserved for the city's elite, and tonight it held the most elite of all. She'd heard the whispers in the kitchen. Vitale. The name carried weight, spoken in hushed tones by staff who'd worked these circles for years. Old money, old power, the kind of family you didn't ask questions about. Sarah pushed through the service door and into the soft golden light of the dining room. There were 8 of them at the long table, men in suits that cost more than her car, their voices low and serious. But her eyes went immediately to the man at the head, and stayed there. He was watching her. Dark hair silvered at the temples, a face carved from shadow and stone, all sharp angles and dangerous beauty. Eyes so pale they looked almost silver in the candlelight, fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He sat like a king holding court, perfectly still, radiating a quiet authority that silenced some primitive part of her brain and told her to run. She didn't run. She had rent to pay. "Your wine, gentlemen." Her voice came out steady, professional. She'd perfected that mask years ago, the pleasant invisibility of good service. She moved around the table, pouring with practiced grace, keeping her eyes down and her movements efficient. When she reached the man at the head of the table, her hand trembled. Just slightly. Just enough that a single drop of wine splashed onto the white tablecloth. "I'm so sorry." She grabbed a napkin, dabbing at the stain, her cheeks burning. "I'll have them replace." "Leave it." His voice was low, rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet. She looked up without meaning to and found those silver eyes inches from her own. Something flickered in his expression. A frown. Confusion. Like he was trying to place her, to solve a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. "Have we met?" he asked. "No, sir." She was certain of that. She would have remembered this man. "I don't believe so." He stared at her a moment longer. Too long, long enough that the other men at the table shifted uncomfortably, then nodded once. "The wine is fine. Continue." Sarah finished the service and retreated to the kitchen, her heart pounding against her ribs. She didn't understand the way he'd looked at her, like he'd seen a ghost. The next 2 hours blurred together in a haze of exhaustion. Plates in, plates out. Smile, pour, clear, repeat. The black spots came and went, dancing at the edges of her vision. She ignored them the way she'd been ignoring them for weeks. Since her mother's medical bills had started arriving, since the insurance company had denied coverage, since she'd picked up the second job and started sleeping 4 hours a night. Mama was gone now, 6 weeks in the ground, and Sarah still hadn't had time to grieve. Couldn't afford to. The bills kept coming even after the body was cold. She was carrying a tray of dessert plates when the world tilted sideways. It happened slowly, then all at once. The edges of her vision went dark. Her legs turned to water. She heard the crash of porcelain before she felt herself falling. And then, there was nothing but black. She came back to consciousness in pieces, voices above her, sharp with concern, something soft beneath her head, a hand on her wrist, fingers pressed to her pulse point. Called an ambulance? No. The word was a command. That voice. The gravel and velvet. No ambulance. Donovan, bring the car around. Sir, we should let the staff. I said no. Sarah forced her eyes open. The ceiling swam above her, crystal chandeliers fracturing into prismatic shards. She tried to sit up, and a firm hand pressed her shoulder back down. Stay still. The man with the silver eyes was kneeling beside her, his face tight with something she couldn't read. You fainted. You're going to a hospital. I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't afford. Did I ask what you could afford? His jaw flexed. You collapsed in the middle of a service. You're pale as death, and I can count your ribs through that jacket. When did you last eat? She couldn't remember. Tried to, but the numbers wouldn't line up in her head. His expression darkened. He said something in rapid Italian to one of the men hovering nearby, then turned back to her. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Connolly. Again, that flicker. That searching look, like he was trying to see beneath her skin. There's something in your pocket, he said quietly. It fell out when you collapsed. Sarah's hand flew to her jacket, the inside pocket, where she always kept it. Her mother's photograph, the only one she had, worn soft at the edges from years of handling. Her talisman, her last connection to the woman who'd raised her alone, who'd worked 3 jobs and never complained, who'd died with secrets Sarah was still trying to unravel. The man held up the photograph, and the color drained from his face. Sarah watched it happen, the way his features went slack, then rigid, the way his hand trembled, just slightly, as he stared at the image. Her mother at 25, dark-haired and laughing, caught in a moment of joy Sarah had never seen in life. Where did you get this? His voice was barely a whisper. It's my mother. She passed away 6 weeks ago. The man looked at her, really looked at her, his pale eyes tracing her features with an intensity that bordered on violence. Your mother, he repeated slowly. What was her name? Elena. Elena Connolly. The name hit him like a physical blow. Sarah saw it. The flinch. The sharp intake of breath. The way his free hand clenched into a fist at his side. Elena, he said. The word sounded like a wound, like a prayer. Elena Marchetti. Sarah's blood went cold. How do you know that name? She never told anyone her maiden name, not even me. The man was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with something ancient and unhealed. Because 26 years ago, Elena Marchetti was supposed to marry me. His eyes burned into hers. And then she disappeared without a trace. The room spun again, but this time it had nothing to do with hunger. Sarah stared at the stranger, this powerful, dangerous man who looked at her mother's photograph like it contained his missing heart, and felt the foundations of everything she knew begin to crack. Who are you? She whispered. Dante Vitale. He tucked the photograph into his jacket with a gentleness that contradicted everything about him. And you're going to tell me everything about your mother, Miss Connolly. Everything. It wasn't a request. And Sarah, lying on the floor of a restaurant she couldn't afford to eat in, understood that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The hospital was private. The kind with single rooms that looked like hotel suites, and nurses who brought fresh flowers with the morning vitals. Sarah had never been anywhere like it, had never imagined places like this existed outside of movies about people whose problems didn't include choosing between rent and food. She'd tried to refuse, had insisted she was fine, that she just needed to go home, that she couldn't afford whatever this was going to cost. Dante Vitale had ignored every protest, his hand firm on her elbow as he guided her into the back of a car that cost more than her mother's entire estate. "The bill is handled," was all he said. "Don't argue." She'd been too weak to argue, too confused, too haunted by the way he'd looked at that photograph, like it had reached into his chest and squeezed. Now she sat propped against expensive pillows, an IV drip restoring fluids she hadn't realized she'd lost, while Dante Vitale sat in the chair beside her bed and waited for answers she didn't have. "Tell me about her," he said. His voice was quiet, but it wasn't a request. Nothing about this man was a request. "Your mother. Tell me everything." Sarah studied him in the soft light. He'd removed his jacket, rolled his sleeves to his elbows, revealing forearms roped with muscle and a thin scar that traced from wrist to elbow. He looked less like a king now and more like a man. Exhausted, haunted, held together by will alone. "She was a seamstress," Sarah said slowly. "She worked from home mostly. Alterations, repairs, sometimes custom pieces for people who could afford them." She paused, remembering. She was beautiful, kind, sad sometimes, in ways she tried to hide. She never talked about her past, never talked about where she came from or who her family was. I asked, when I was younger. She'd just get this look, this faraway look, and change the subject. Dante's jaw tightened. "She never mentioned me, never mentioned the Vitales. Never. I didn't even know her maiden name until I found her birth certificate after she died." Sarah's throat constricted. She had a box, hidden in the back of her closet. Old photographs, letters in Italian I couldn't read, a pressed flower. I thought maybe she'd had a life before me, a life she'd left behind. But she never told you why she left. She never told me anything. Silence stretched between them. Dante leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with old grief. "We were supposed to be married, an arrangement between our families, the Vitales and the Marchettis. I was 22. She was 20. He lifted his head, and Sarah saw something raw in those silver eyes. "I thought it was just business at first, a merger of power, but Elena..." He stopped, swallowed. Elena was different. She was light in a world of shadows. She made me believe I could be more than what my father was raising me to be. Sarah's heart clenched. She'd never heard anyone talk about her mother like that, like she was something precious, something loved. "What happened?" "The night before our wedding, she vanished. No note, no warning. Her family claimed they knew nothing, and a week later, the Marchettis were gone too. Scattered to the wind." His hands clenched. "I searched for years, spent a fortune on investigators, followed every lead. Nothing. It was like she'd never existed." "Why would she run?" "I don't know." The words sounded like they'd been torn from him. "I've spent 26 years asking myself that question. Whether I did something. Whether she was afraid of me, of my family, of the life she'd be marrying into." He looked at Sarah, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "You look exactly like her. The moment you walked into that room, I thought I was seeing a ghost." Sarah didn't know what to say. Her entire understanding of her mother, quiet, gentle Elena who made beautiful things with her hands and never raised her voice, was reshaping itself into something she didn't recognize. "She loved you," she said finally. "I don't know why she left or what she was running from, but I found letters in that box. Love letters. In Italian. I couldn't read most of them, but I recognized the feeling. She kept them for 26 years, Mr. Vitale. She kept a dried flower from what I think was a bouquet. Whatever happened, she didn't forget you." Something cracked in his expression. Just for a moment. A flash of pain so acute it hurt to witness. before the mask slid back into place. Dante, he said quietly. You'll call me Dante. I don't think your mother was going to be my wife. That makes you... He stopped, as if the words were too heavy to speak. That makes you something. I don't know what yet, but I intend to find out. He stood, pulling a card from his wallet and setting it on her bedside table. Heavy cardstock, embossed with a name and a number. Nothing else. When you're discharged, my driver will take you home. Tomorrow you'll come to my estate. We have more to discuss. I have to work. You collapse from exhaustion and malnutrition. His voice sharpened. You're not going back to that job. Not until you've recovered. I don't have a choice. I have bills. Your mother's medical debt. I know. It's been paid. Sarah's heart stopped. What? All of it. As of an hour ago. He said it like it was nothing, like erasing $60,000 of debt was a minor inconvenience. Consider it a wedding gift, 26 years late. I can't accept. It's already done. He moved toward the door, then paused, his hand on the frame. Without turning, he said, Elena used to sing. Old Italian folk songs, ones her grandmother taught her. Did she teach you? The question caught Sarah off guard. She thought of nights in their tiny apartment, her mother's voice rising and falling in melodies that seemed to carry the weight of generations. The songs Sarah had learned without trying, absorbed into her bones. Yes, she whispered. She taught me. Dante's shoulders tensed. He stood there for a long moment, frozen, before he finally spoke. Then you have more of her than you know. His voice was barely audible. I'll see you tomorrow, Sarah. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the ghosts of a past she'd never known existed. The Vitale estate sat on a cliff overlooking the sea, a sprawling villa of weathered stone and climbing roses that looked like it had grown from the earth itself. Sarah pressed her face to the car window as they wound up the private drive, her breath fogging the glass. She'd never seen anything so beautiful, so impossible. The driver, a silent man named Marco who'd arrived at her apartment precisely at 10, opened her door and gestured toward the entrance. Massive wooden doors, iron-studded and ancient, flanked by urns overflowing with flowers she couldn't name. She was wearing her best clothes. They felt shabby here. Everything she owned would feel shabby here. Dante met her in the foyer. He looked different in daylight, less like a shadow given form and more like a man who hadn't slept. His shirt was open at the collar, his hair slightly disheveled. Human, almost approachable. You came, he said. You paid off $60,000 of my debt. She kept her voice even, though her heart was racing. The least I could do was show up. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or approval. Come, there's someone I want you to meet. He led her through rooms that belonged in museums, vaulted ceilings, frescoed walls, furniture that looked older than her entire bloodline. Sarah tried not to gawk. Failed. The economic contrast was almost violent, her thrift store dress moving through spaces designed for silk and diamonds. They stopped at a sunlit conservatory filled with plants and the soft sound of water from a stone fountain. An elderly woman sat in a wheelchair by the windows, her white hair pinned in an elegant twist, her face a map of years and sorrows. She turned as they entered, and Sarah saw Dante's eyes in her face, that same silver intensity, undimmed by age. Mother, Dante said softly, this is Sarah, Elena's daughter. The woman's hand flew to her chest. For a long moment she simply stared, her lips trembling. Madonna mia, she whispered. It's like seeing her again, after all these years. Sarah, this is my mother. Lucia Vitale. Sarah didn't know what to do. Curtsy, bow, offer a handshake. She settled for a small nod, suddenly aware of how out of place she was in this world of old names and older money. But Lucia reached out and took her hand, pulling her closer with surprising strength. "Sit with me," she said. "Tell me about my Elena. Tell me everything." Sarah glanced at Dante. He nodded once, then withdrew to the doorway, giving them space while remaining close enough to hear. So Sarah talked. About her mother's small apartment with its sewing machine by the window. About the way Elena hummed while she worked. Melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep and unreachable. About her kindness to neighbors, her patience with difficult clients, her quiet strength in the face of every hardship. Lucia listened with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, nodding at details that seemed to confirm memories of her own. "She was like a daughter to me," Lucia said when Sarah finally fell silent. "When she vanished, I thought my heart would never recover. Dante?" She glanced at her son, still standing in the doorway. He searched for so long, refused to give up hope, even when everyone told him to move on. "Why did she leave?" Sarah asked, the question that had been burning in her chest since the restaurant. "Please, if you know anything." Lucia's expression shifted. Something dark moved behind her eyes. There were people who didn't want the marriage to happen. Old enemies. Men who saw the union of Vitale and Marchetti as a threat to their power. She paused, her voice dropping. "A week before the wedding, Elena received a threat. I don't know the details. She never told me, never told anyone. But I believe she ran to protect us. To protect Dante." "From who?" "The Contis." Dante's voice cut through the room. He'd moved closer, his face hard with old fury. "A rival family. They controlled territory we were expanding into. A marriage alliance between Vitale and Marchetti would have made us untouchable." His jaw clenched. "They threatened her. And rather than tell me, rather than let me protect her, she disappeared." Sarah's mind reeled. Her mother, gentle, quiet Elena, who flinched at raised voices, had sacrificed her own happiness, her own love, to protect a man she was supposed to marry. Had spent 26 years in hiding, alone, working herself to exhaustion, while carrying a secret that had clearly consumed her. "The Contis?" Sarah repeated slowly. "Are they still—" "The old generation is dead, but the family survives." Dante's eyes met hers. "And there are those who have long memories." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Over the following weeks, she found herself drawn deeper into the Vitale world. Dante insisted she stay at the estate, "until we understand what your mother was running from," and she'd been too overwhelmed to refuse. Her room overlooked the sea, larger than her entire apartment, filled with fresh flowers that appeared each morning as if by magic. She spent her days with Lucia, who seemed to come alive in her presence. The older woman was lonely, Sarah realized, isolated by age and grief in this beautiful prison, surrounded by staff who feared her son and family who were too busy with the business of power to sit with an old woman and listen to her stories. But Sarah listened, and one afternoon, without thinking, she began to sing. It was one of her mother's songs, a lullaby about the sea, about sailors who never came home, about women who waited on cliffsides with candles in the window. The Italian words came easily, etched into her memory by years of hearing her mother's voice. Lucia went still. Then she began to cry, not with sorrow, but with something like joy. "She taught you," she whispered. "Oh, my dear girl, she taught you our songs." From the doorway, Dante watched. Sarah saw him there, his face unreadable, his hands clenched at his sides. She held his gaze as she sang, and something passed between them. Something fragile and unnamed. Something that had nothing to do with his lost love, and everything to do with the woman standing before him now. The song ended. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken things. You have her voice, Dante said finally. But it's your own too. Something different. Something. He stopped, as if catching himself. You should rest. Dinner is at 7. He left before she could respond. That night, Sarah dreamed of her mother. Elena stood on a cliff top, her hair whipping in the wind, her face turned toward the sea. She was saying something, but Sarah couldn't hear the words over the crashing waves. When Sarah reached for her, Elena dissolved into mist, leaving only the echo of a warning. She woke to the sound of breaking glass. Sarah sat up, her heart pounding. The estate was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet cold on the marble floor, and crept to her door. The hallway was dark, empty. But something felt wrong. She found Lucia's room first. The old woman was safe, sleeping soundly, undisturbed. Sarah exhaled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. And then she saw the note pinned to her own door. She hadn't noticed it in the dark. White paper, expensive stock, a single line written in elegant script. The daughter should have stayed hidden like the mother. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Dante! His name tore from her throat before she could stop it. Dante! He appeared within seconds, barefoot and shirtless, a gun in his hand she hadn't known he carried. His eyes swept the hallway, then locked onto the note. His face went pale, then cold, then terrifying. Inside, he commanded, pushing her back into her room. Now. What does it mean? Who? The Contis. The word was a snarl. They know you're here. They know who you are. He pulled out his phone, barking orders in rapid Italian. Guards materialized in the hallway, voices crackling over radios. Sarah stood in the center of her beautiful room, the note crumpled in her trembling hand, and understood with terrible clarity her mother had run from this world for a reason. And now that world had found her daughter. The next 3 days passed in a blur of security protocols and whispered conversations that stopped whenever Sarah entered a room. Dante had tripled the guards, installed new cameras, brought in men with hard eyes and harder hands who patrolled the grounds in shifts. The beautiful estate had become a fortress, and Sarah was trapped inside it. She saw him rarely now. He was always in meetings, on calls, disappearing for hours and returning with shadows under his eyes and blood on his knuckles he thought she didn't notice. Whatever war he was fighting it without her. It was Lucia who finally told her the truth. The Contis want leverage, the old woman said one afternoon. They were in the conservatory, the same room where they'd first met, but the sunlight felt different now. Colder. They've been losing territory for years. Dante has made sure of that. But with you here, with Elena's daughter under his roof, they see an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Lucia's weathered hands folded in her lap. To hurt him in a way bullets never could. Sarah's stomach turned. I should leave. If I'm putting you all in danger. You would break his heart. Lucia's voice was sharp, cutting through Sarah's protest. I've watched my son for 26 years, watched him build walls so high no one could reach him, watched him bury his grief in work and violence and cold, calculated power. She leaned forward, her silver eyes fierce. And then you walked into that restaurant, and I saw something I thought I'd never see again. Hope. In my son's eyes. Hope. He doesn't... Sarah's voice faltered. He loved my mother. I'm just a reminder of what he lost. You foolish girl. Lucia's tone softened. You're not a reminder. You're a second chance. Don't you see the way he looks at you? The way he's looked at you from the beginning. Not like you're Elena's ghost, but like you're something entirely new. Something he's terrified to want. Sarah didn't know what to say. She'd felt it too. The charge in the air when Dante entered a room, the way his gaze lingered on her face, the careful distance he maintained like a man standing too close to a flame. She told herself it was grief, projection, the echo of an old love transferred onto a convenient target. But what if it wasn't? That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered the halls of the estate, her bare feet silent on the cool marble until she found herself outside Dante's study. The door was cracked, golden light spilling into the corridor. She should have turned back, should have respected his privacy, his space, the boundaries he'd drawn so carefully between them. Instead, she pushed open the door. He was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the moonlit sea. He'd removed his jacket, loosened his tie. The lines of exhaustion on his face made him look older, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "You should be in bed," he said without turning. "I couldn't sleep." "Neither could I." He took a slow sip of whiskey. "The Contis have made their move. They've called for a sit-down tomorrow night. Neutral territory." "A trap." "Almost certainly." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I'm going anyway." "Dante." "They'll keep coming, Sarah. They'll keep threatening you, threatening my mother until I end this." His jaw hardened. "I should have ended it years ago, after what they did to Elena, what they stole from both of us." He set down the glass, moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "I won't let them take anything else from me." He stopped inches away, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the cedar of his cologne, close enough to see the storm raging behind those silver eyes. "You're not just Elena's daughter to me," he said quietly. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens tomorrow, you need to know." "Then tell me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Tell me what I am to you." He lifted his hand. His fingers trembled. This man who commanded armies, who killed without hesitation, as they brushed against her cheek. "You're the thing I never thought I'd find again," he murmured. "A reason to be more than what my father made me." Sarah leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "Then come back," she said. "Tomorrow. Whatever happens, you come back to me." He kissed her then, soft at first, almost reverent, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Then deeper, hungrier, 26 years of loneliness and longing pouring out of him and into her. Sarah kissed him back with everything she had, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his like she could hold him there through sheer force of will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll come back," he said. "I promise." She should have known better than to trust promises made in the dark. The attack came the next afternoon, hours before the scheduled sit-down. Sarah was with Lucia in the conservatory when the first explosion shook the estate. Glass shattered, alarms screamed, guards shouted orders in Italian as gunfire erupted somewhere on the grounds. "They're early," Lucia whispered, her face pale. "They're not waiting for the meeting. They're coming now." Sarah didn't think. She grabbed Lucia's wheelchair and pushed, racing through corridors that had become a war zone. Smoke filled the air. Bodies lay in doorways, some in black suits, some in the gray uniforms of the Conti soldiers. The smell of blood and cordite burned her throat. The safe room. Dante had shown her, weeks ago, when she'd first arrived. Behind the library, through a hidden door. Reinforced steel. Biometric locks. If she could get Lucia there. They were 10 feet from the library when the man stepped out of the shadows. He was young, younger than Sarah expected, with a pretty face twisted by cruelty and a gun pointed directly at Lucia's head. "Going somewhere?" His Italian accent was thick, his smile sharp. "The old woman stays with me. Insurance, you understand. in case Vitale needs convincing. Don't, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. She's not part of this. She's a Vitale, that makes her part of everything. He gestured with the gun. Step away from the chair. Sarah didn't move. Step away, or I'll... You'll what? The words came out hard, fury overriding fear. Kill a helpless old woman? Is that what the great Conti family has become? Cowards who threaten grandmothers? The man's face darkened. He shifted his aim from Lucia to Sarah. You have a mouth on you, just like your mother. You knew my mother? I knew of her. The woman who ran rather than face her fate. He stepped closer, the gun inches from Sarah's chest. My father always said she was a coward. Looks like the apple doesn't fall far from... Sarah moved. She didn't know where the instinct came from. Some deep well of survival she'd never had to tap before. Her hand shot out, knocking the gun aside as her other fist connected with his throat. Not hard enough to do real damage, but enough to make him choke, to make him stumble. And in that moment of chaos, Lucia proved she was more than a frail old woman in a wheelchair. The cane Sarah hadn't noticed, hidden beside the chair's wheel, swung in a vicious arc, catching the man behind the knees. He went down hard, the gun clattering across the marble floor. Sarah dove for it. Her fingers closed around cold metal just as the man lunged for her. She rolled, brought the weapon up, saw his eyes widen. Sarah! Dante's voice cut through the chaos like thunder. She turned her head for just a moment, saw him at the end of the corridor, covered in blood that might or might not be his own, his face a mask of terror. The Conti soldier used the distraction. His hand closed around her ankle, yanking her toward him, his other hand pulling a knife from his belt. The gunshot was deafening, but it wasn't Sarah who fired. Dante stood over them, his weapon smoking, his chest heaving. The Conti soldier lay still, a red bloom spreading across his chest, the knife falling from fingers that would never grip anything again. And then Dante was on his knees beside her, his hands running over her body, checking for wounds. His voice cracked and desperate. Sarah, Sarah, look at me. Are you hurt? Did he... I'm okay. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. I'm okay. Lucia. I'm fine, boy. Lucia's voice was steady, though her face was gray. Thanks to your girl. She has more of Elena's fire than she knows. Dante pulled Sarah into his arms, crushing her against his chest. She felt his heart pounding, felt the tremors running through his body, felt the wetness against her hair that might have been blood or might have been tears. I thought I lost you, he rasped. I saw him with the knife, and I thought... You didn't. She pulled back to look at his face. The fear there, the raw, unguarded emotion he'd spent so long hiding. You saved me. You saved yourself. His voice was rough with wonder. You saved my mother. We saved each other. Around them, the sounds of battle were fading, Dante's men securing the estate, the Contis retreating or dead. The war wasn't over, might never be truly over, but this battle was won. Dante helped her to her feet, then did something she didn't expect. He turned to his mother, still gripping Sarah's hand, and said, I'm going to marry her. Lucia smiled. A real smile, the first Sarah had seen on her face. About time, she said. I was starting to think you'd never find the courage. Sarah stared at him. Dante! Not now. He cupped her face in his hands, blood and all, and kissed her hard. After. When the bodies are buried and the documents are signed and I can give you the proposal you deserve, but I need you to know, I need you to hear it now, that I choose you. Not Elena's memory, not the past. You, Sarah. Only you. She kissed him back, tasting blood and smoke and something like hope. Then yes, she whispered against his lips. When you ask properly, the answer is yes. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the cliff top where her mother had once stood in her dreams. The sea stretched endless before her, gray-green and restless, crashing against rocks that had weathered 1,000 storms. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carried the salt spray scent that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Behind her, the Vitale estate glowed golden in the late afternoon light, no longer a fortress, no longer a prison. Home. The Contis were finished, not destroyed. Dante wasn't that kind of man, despite everything, but broken. Their leadership scattered, their territory absorbed, their threat neutralized through a combination of calculated violence and strategic mercy that Sarah didn't fully understand and didn't need to. What mattered was that it was over. What mattered was that Lucia could sit in her conservatory without armed guards at every door. What mattered was that Sarah could walk these grounds without looking over her shoulder. She visited her mother's grave every Sunday now, a proper headstone, paid for by Dante, in a cemetery overlooking the water. Elena Marchetti Connolly, beloved mother, remembered always. Sarah brought flowers, roses, her mother's favorite, and sometimes she sang. The old songs, the ones that carried generations of love and loss in their melodies. She'd found the truth about why her mother ran. It had taken weeks of digging through old records, of conversations with people who remembered the old days, of piecing together fragments of a story Elena had taken to her grave. The Contis hadn't just threatened her. They'd threatened to kill Dante's entire family. Lucia, his father, his younger sister who died of illness years later. Elena had been given a choice: disappear, or watch everyone she loved be slaughtered. She'd chosen sacrifice. She'd chosen to break her own heart so that others might live. She was braver than anyone knew, Sarah murmured to the wind. Braver than I ever understood. She was? Dante's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved like smoke when he wanted to, silent and inevitable. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. But so are you. She leaned into him, let his warmth chase away the chill of the sea breeze. I keep thinking about what might have been, if she'd told you the truth, if you'd fought together instead of apart. We'd probably both be dead. His voice was matter of fact, but his arms tightened around her. The Contis were stronger then. My father was dying. We weren't ready for that war. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Elena knew that. She made an impossible choice, and she made it out of love. Do you still think about her? The way she was? Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I think about who I was when I loved her. Young, idealistic, convinced that wanting something badly enough could make it happen. He turned her in his arms, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. I'm not that man anymore. The years changed me. The loss changed me. But you, his thumb traced her cheekbone. You've changed me too. In different ways. Better ways. I'm not her replacement? No. He said it firmly with absolute certainty. You're not her replacement. You're not her echo. You're Sarah, stubborn and brave and kind in ways that have nothing to do with anyone but yourself. His silver eyes softened. I loved Elena with everything I was at 22. I love you with everything I am now. Those aren't the same thing. And I wouldn't want them to be. Sarah's eyes stung with tears she didn't try to hide. I love you too. I think I have since you knelt on that restaurant floor and looked at me like I was a miracle instead of a mess. You were both. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face from dangerous to devastating. You still are. He stepped back, and Sarah's heart stuttered as he reached into his jacket pocket. I told you I'd ask properly, he said. When the war was over, when I could give you the moment you deserved. The box was small, velvet, midnight blue. When he opened it, the diamond caught the fading sunlight and scattered it into 1,000 tiny stars. It was my grandmother's, Dante said, and her grandmother's before that. 5 generations of Vitale women have worn this ring. He lowered himself to one knee on the windswept cliff, the most powerful man she'd ever known kneeling before her, like she was the one with all the power. I'm asking you to be the 6th. I'm asking you to build a life with me, not because of what you represent or who your mother was, but because you're the woman I want to wake up beside for the rest of my days. He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. Sarah Connolly, will you marry me? She didn't hesitate, didn't need to think. The answer had been living in her heart for months, waiting for this moment. Yes, she said. 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting for her all along, and rose to kiss her with the sea crashing below and the sky blazing orange and pink above. Sarah kissed him back, tasting salt and joy and the promise of a future she'd never dared to dream. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, she looked down at the ring on her hand. The weight of it, the meaning of it. Lucia is going to be insufferable, she said. She's been planning the wedding since the day I arrived. She started planning it the moment she saw how I looked at you. Dante's smile turned wry. My mother has many gifts. Subtlety isn't one of them. They walked back to the estate hand in hand, the setting sun painting long shadows across the grounds. In the conservatory, Lucia waited with champagne already chilling and a smile that said she'd known exactly what her son had planned. Finally, she declared, pulling Sarah into a fierce embrace. Welcome to the family, my dear. Officially. That night they ate dinner on the terrace overlooking the sea. Lucia told stories about Dante as a child, embarrassing ones that made him groan and Sarah laugh until her sides ached. The staff brought course after course, each one more delicious than the last, and Sarah marveled at how natural it felt. How right. She thought about the girl she'd been 4 months ago. Exhausted, starving, invisible, working double shifts to pay off a dead woman's debts, carrying a photograph she didn't understand and a grief she couldn't process. That girl had fainted on a restaurant floor and woken up in a different world. No, that wasn't quite right. She'd woken up in the same world. She'd just finally found her place in it. Later, when the moon had risen and Lucia had retired and the estate had settled into peaceful silence, Sarah stood at the window of the bedroom she now shared with Dante. His arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About my mother. About how she'd feel, knowing I ended up here, in the life she ran from." "And?" Sarah smiled, leaning back into his warmth. "I think she'd understand. I think she'd be glad that her sacrifice meant something, that the family she protected got to survive, that her daughter found love in the place she had to leave behind." Dante pressed a kiss to her neck. "She'd be proud of you. I'm certain of it." "Are you?" "Yes." He turned her to face him, his silver eyes soft in the moonlight. "Because I'm proud of you. Every day. For your courage, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to let me push you away." He kissed her forehead. "You're extraordinary, Sarah Vitale." "I'm not a Vitale yet." "You will be." His smile held a promise. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." She kissed him then, slow and deep, full of all the things words couldn't capture, the gratitude and the grief, the fear and the hope, the love that had grown from impossible circumstances into something unshakable. Outside, the sea sang its eternal song against the cliffs. Inside, Two people who had found each other against all odds held on tight and didn't let go. Some love stories begin with a glance across a crowded room. Some begin with grand gestures and destined meetings. Theirs began with a girl who fainted, a photograph that unlocked the past, and a second chance neither of them expected. And that, Sarah thought, was the most beautiful beginning of all. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is essential for me to continue creating content like this.